This episode of the CUInsight Experience is brought to you by Elan Credit Card. Elan partners with more than 250 credit unions to provide an outsourced credit card program. Welcome to episode 145 of the show. I'm Randy Smith, one of the co-founders of CUInsight.com, and this show is all about taking a deep dive with the leaders from inside and today outside the credit union movement that make it so great. Today, I am excited to have a conversation with Karen Allen. Karen helps people all over the world get out of a rut and wholeheartedly pursue their biggest goals. I am geeked about this conversation. And also, she talks a lot about leading with a growth mindset, which we love to talk about on the show. I'm excited also to let everybody know she's the keynote for our next CUInsight Mini-Con event coming up. And with that, let's just jump right in and have some fun here. Karen, welcome to the show.
Randy, thank you so much for having me. I'm really grateful to be here, especially knowing that you guys already talk about growth mindset. Like, I feel like I'm in the right room.
Oh, absolutely. And I know the folks at Mini-Con are going to love hearing from you. I was actually, I watched your TED Talk preparing for this show also. So much great stuff to talk to you about. But I'd like to start with, your story, basically. How did your career start and how did it lead you to where you are today, giving these amazing keynotes and having a book that just recently came out?
Yes. Well, thank you for saying that. I can't say that, I knew that my life is going to be this and I wanted to be a speaker. Or I wanted to be an author. It was none of that. Where I am today is purely a response to life and being faced with unforeseen changes and circumstances that, again, I never would have picked for myself. But that's kind of where I found this power, if you will. It's really in our response to how life unfolds. I am a recovering perfectionist. So I just like to throw that out there. So part of what comes with that, character trait is this need for planning and risk, management and trying to perfectly curate and craft circumstances, if you will, even throughout your life that help you to minimize risk and problems. But when I was 29 years old, I realized that as much as I try to create a perfectly crafted plan, that life, it usually unfolds just outside of what you can control most often.
I'm a believer in what you say, that idea of like when we were young and going into college or whatever it happened to be that we could plan this life for ourselves or that perfect life. I remember we had an intern a few years back at CUInsight, and as he was going back to school, I'm like, my only advice was like, my life has changed so many times over the course of my life that I could have never planned or expected for, right? Including CUInsight. I mean, this idea of like, what's your 10-year plan? I struggle with that because I'm like, it seems like there's probably a couple changes that happen in every decade. So anyways, I'm with you. You said perfection, and I love that because it was something that I picked out of, on your website when I was, so I'm going to use this line directly from your site, but what is the get out of perfection free card? And why is, I guess, important for all of us to have one of those?
Yes. I mean, think of the pressure of perfection, right? And it's so unrealistic for us to be able to do things in a very calculated way or in a way that has already been done before. And we just want to mimic it and, imitate it. I mean, it's way too complex, and life doesn't have to be that complicated. It's much simpler than that, if you will. And so just to back up a little bit, because I think it is important that they understand the context. Certainly, listeners, you will hear this when you come. And I talked about this during my keynote, which will be great. But it's important, even if you don't hear it or if you hear it again, just to kind of know where I'm coming from. When I was 29 years old, my husband died. He died suddenly. He died unexpectedly. But what I found through that is it's not just how you lose your significant other or someone that you care about deeply. We cannot imagine life without someone that we love. It is absolutely incomprehensible. You just can't do it. And so I remember there was a time that I was sitting next to a widow and she had lost her husband through stage 4 cancer. So they had some time to prepare. They had months. They were going through it. And for us, it changed in a heartbeat. And all of a sudden I got a call and he was gone. And so I remember sitting next to her and recognizing the similarities in our pain, even though we had lost our spouses very different ways. And then as I started to share my story and some of the things that I had grown through, I was then meeting people who had not experienced death of a loved one at all. They experienced life in really hard ways. Right. They experienced, different losses and changes that just brought them to this place of like, what do I do from here? Right now, what? I didn't plan for this to happen. Now, how do I respond? And so while initially I started building this, story or brand or whatever you want to call it based on my experience going through grief, I started to move away from that because I didn't want to focus on grief. I wanted to focus on growth because it's in that space that, regardless of the pains that we've experienced, and they may be very different in the details, but they are absolutely identical when it comes to how we experience them as humans, all the complex emotions that we go through. Instead of that being the focal point, it was more so of, okay, let's accept that we go through hard stuff. Let's just start there. That's a basic, baseline, if you will, of the human experience. We're going to go through stuff. But more importantly, let's be more conscious and calculated and more thoughtful and mindful and intentional about how we respond to it, because it's in that response. This is what I found, and I've seen this with other people too. In that response is really what creates a ripple effect. And ultimately, the quality of your life comes from your response to tragedies.
You just rattled off so many of my favorite words, like intentionality. Sorry.
Yes.
This conversation's going to be even more fun. The one thing that I was thinking about, and I love the growth mindset and that looking forward mindset. One of the things I've tried to do on the show this year is to stop talking about the pandemic, because we spent so much time there. But to move forward, something that I've noticed, and I think we've all seen the articles on it this year, is that idea of like the Great Resignation and people kind of changing their priorities after a couple years away, let's just call it, from what life used to be. For the people that are out there, maybe they feel like they're in a rut, to use a word, from your website, and they're trying to move forward, or they realize that they want something more. They want to live a more intentional life. Is there that first step? Are there hacks that you've picked up along the way for that person who's maybe listening today?
Absolutely. Well, the Great Resignation was an interesting term that really caught fire. Everybody started talking about it. But what I found, and I did hear this some way, and it did resonate more deeply, which was, it was the Great Reset.
Yeah.
Because all of our systems were shocked. Individually, our family units, the way that we do school, the way that we do work, everything went through this shock. And what was just unique about it is that we all went through it together. And so
globally.
Right. And so this reset really gave people an opportunity to realign these priorities that probably we've taken for granted. For example, our mental well-being. Right. I talk to my son all the time about how do you take care of your mind, because it is the operating system for your life. And one of the ways that we talk about is because he loves cars. I said, well, would you let your car get to E? You would not let your car get to E. And he's like, of course not. I would stop. I would never get to E. I'm going to stop. I'm going to refuel. I'm going to make sure that I don't get stuck on the side of the road. And I'm like, same with our brain. Right. But I think, again, because we were under such an enormous amount of stress and pressure, and we had to adapt in ways that nobody had a roadmap to say, how do we do this? Right. So it was just an intense level of uncertainty. And so through that, people started to say, well, hold on, all of the systems I had in place are breaking down. And it got to a very basic human space, which is, what do I really need to thrive and to be okay? And not all of the distractions that fill our day, right? All of the things all the obligations that we're tied to, everything stripped away. It gave us the opportunity to focus on that thing that was on the back burner, and that was ourselves. And so as we did that, because we were given an abundance of time, because everything changed, what people started to tune into was, we have these two voices in our head. It's one voice, but it's two narratives. One is that inner critic that we hear, right? It's the one that is always telling us we're not good enough. You're not going to get it. Why would you do this? But the other one is the inner guide. And it's just that the noise can be so loud that we don't listen to that inner guide. And that's the one that's actually trying to help us live this life that feels full, that feels meaningful. So when I talk to people who are like, hey, I've navigated this and I'm trying to figure out what to do on the other side, first, what I encourage them to do is to continue to cultivate that relationship with their inner guide, because all the busyness distracts us from listening to it. But if we can just put the noise in its place, release all of those thoughts of worry or stress or what have you, right? Obligation even, and spend some time going inward and really figuring out, like, what kind of life do I want to live? Like, what actually matters to me? What is important? What should be a priority? When you do that, it's like beautiful to see this, but it is hard, and you have to be very brave to take the first step in this change, because it's intentional change. Is once you start to realign your priorities in the way that serve your well-being first, everything else starts to fall into place. It just does. And that doesn't always mean you have to change your jobs. Sometimes it means you change the way you do your job so that you can be the healthiest, best version of yourself. Because not everybody was leaving a job because they didn't like their job. They were actually leaving these subpar cultures that were not allowing them or supporting them to thrive. So it wasn't that they just wanted to leave a job. They were tired of the environment that was an unhealthy environment that was actually doing more damage than good.
Okay, so much of this podcast becomes scratch my own itch questions, but and this happens to be one of them. As you were talking, I was thinking about earlier in what you were saying was this idea that like many of us have expectations of what life is supposed to be. Maybe we were taught or brought up with. And this comes completely from a conversation I was having a friend who was going through a divorce. We were talking yesterday. So the trauma point, right? But one of the things I was talking to him about was that idea of like, wait, whose expectations are you trying to build back to? Are these yours? Is this what you need to maybe even bring it back to that more the professional side of things? I think it'd be a similar question though, is do you have any tips, I guess, for people to kind of get past, well, that's the way we were supposed to do it. That's the way you're supposed to create a life, a career, or whatever, when they are trying to reset where they're like, yeah, but I'm doing what's expected and it's not lighting me up. Right? Yep.
Yeah. First thing you need to say, so one of the things I actually teach this in my book is to build a better relationship with this inner voice, right? So if you notice that the voice is very negative, we call it the gremlin in my house. If it's a gremlin, you just have to notice that that's the tone that's coming through. But the more that you start to build a relationship with this voice, you can actually use it as a problem solving partner. So let me just put that out there first. If you notice that your voice is coming from a negative space, that's not who I'm saying you need to problem solve with.
Right.
That's the one that's getting in your way. But the problem solving partner is the same way you would talk to a friend. So I love that you bring this up as an example. When you're talking to a friend, you are coming from a space of love and caring. You're going to create a safe space for them to share. We need to talk to ourselves the same way. So sometimes when you are saying, okay, I have these expectations, this is what I'm supposed to do for work, ask yourself the same way you would ask a friend, where did those expectations come from? And like, how do they make you feel? Do they make you feel stressed or do they make you feel at ease? Do they bring you joy or are they draining you? Are they stressing you out or are they giving you energy? So first thing we need to do is we need to start asking some questions, right? Like where is this coming from? A big part of growth isn't just the new things that you're learning. It's unlearning old ways too. It's unlearning old beliefs that were passed down that don't serve us anymore because they came from the industrial age. Or they came from a mindset where you were able to buy a house for $18,000, right? Not $400,000 or what have you. So it's like you have to really kind of take into account where all of these expectations, or we'll even, use air quotes here, knowledge that was probably shared with you from community or from family. So if it's coming to you and it doesn't actually sit right, that's a good indicator that it might not be for you. That those expectations may not align with your truest desires. And so that's the first thing is like, if you are battling with what you expected life to be like, then pause and say, well, where did I get that from? Like, because here's the thing. And I think this is like very important to point out. We all know that our fingerprints are completely different. We know that, right? Like nobody actually argues that when we learn that fact in school, right? We're like, oh, that's a really cool fun fact about the human body. But the same way that our fingerprints are completely different, even identical twins don't have the same fingerprint. So is the fingerprint of your brain. You think differently than most people. So is the fingerprint of your soul. What lights you up is going to be different than other people. And so is the fingerprint of your life. Your life will look different than others, and that is okay. Because if it fulfills you and if it brings you meaning and joy, and the best way that I describe it is you feel alive. That doesn't mean you're not going to do hard things. You will do hard things, but you will not mind doing the hard things because you are so connected to the why that's behind that. And the best way that I could describe this is when I knew that I was not going to build a brand on grief and I was going to build it on growth, I was up against so many people who were lovingly supporting me, but they kept telling me that I needed to be a counselor or I needed to do something that was going to help grief in the workplace or all that. But I knew in the core of my being, I don't want to talk about grief all the time. That's actually not going to be helpful. That's actually not going to serve people. And it was because I had more conversations with myself did I find my true North Star. And by continuing to check in with that, I was now, instead of trying to plan and craft the perfect road forward, I was being led. And as I was being led, because I could listen to that still, quiet inner guide, it actually felt, I would say I felt free. I had this freedom that was just like, I know that I can do this. And not only am I learning to get to know myself better, I've learned to love myself more. And more than anything, I trust myself. And when you learn to trust yourself, it doesn't matter what anybody else says, you will be good.
Yeah, and you will feel much better. My fiance has heard me say this many times. I'm not sure I've ever said it on the podcast, but there was a point in my life where I just was loving everything and people would tell me how great it was and I would almost apologize for it. And I'd be like, oh, but I don't have this. And then one day I was like, why do I apologize for this life that I'm enjoying living so much? And so I started going, yeah, you're right. It's pretty amazing. And it just
why do you think you were doing that? Why did you think you were apologetic?
Because I think I switched away from that's the way it's always been done, or that you had to work and live a certain way, right? So I was kind of the expectations what you were talking about resonates with me, because so for 30 some odd years, probably 40 years, I lived with trying to fulfill an expectation, maybe. And then all of a sudden you switch and you kind of live what lights you up or what makes you feel alive. And people are like, this seems pretty amazing. And I'd still go, oh, but I don't have this.
Yeah.
I don't want that. This is amazing.
But what's interesting, what you pointed out is that, people will notice the difference in you.
Oh,
and when you notice that difference in someone else, don't you want that too?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, it's amazing.
Yes, we all want that. It's just that we can't follow the other person's roadmap to get it.
It's a beautiful thing when we do. This is something I wanted to ask you and to make sure that I got to. I was just looking over at my notes, but for the leaders that are out there listening today, when they're thinking about their team, their organization, like I said, you've been using a bunch of words that I just absolutely love, but how do you lead from a place, or how do you create that space for your employees to, have whether it's a career or life in general, help them, for a place of joy and abundance? Because we all know, the culture of an organization that has that is probably going to be pretty successful.
Yeah.
Probably
absolutely.
not worrying about losing employees either. So.
Well, exactly. I actually learned this from a really phenomenal leader. He's in the telecommunications space, and his team was not only the highest ranked as far as performance, but also in employee culture for 16 consecutive years. So this is not just a data point that I'm like, oh, this sounds great. This is a real legit lived out rule. The way that you get the most out of your people is you give them the space to be human. And what I mean by that is they are not just their job title. They are not just the responsibilities that are listed under that job title, but they have different passions. They also have a life outside of work. They have different things that make them tick, that make them feel appreciated or valued. And so what it looks like is, one, you don't just treat your people like the title that they are, but you understand that there's a human behind that title. It's very, very important. The way that's lived out is having human conversations. Some people will say, oh, how was your weekend? That's a nice thing to say. But if I knew you were in photography, I would say, hey, have you taken any good pictures lately? I'd love to see what you've shot. Right? Or if somebody is who maybe in their line of work, they're like, I know that this is what I do for my job, but I'm actually looking for different opportunities outside of this role that are just going to stretch me just because I want to grow professionally. If you knew that about your people and you serve them in that way, every human loves to be challenged in a good way. So serve their growth, right? Get to know what really lights them up. We say, oh, well, it's okay if you need to take a day off. No. We should all take a day off together and have a mental health day, right? Let them know that it is okay to take a break. Build rest into how you operate. Say, hey, you need to take a break because you've had 5 meetings in a row. Please make sure that you do that, Randy. It's very important to me that you step away, right? Show them that you care. And it's funny because it becomes very, again, complex. We overcomplicate this. But if you were to care for your people the same way that you care for your loved ones, Come on. That's like, it's a direct line. It's a direct line. There's this really great quote by Tony Hsieh. He was the founder of Zappos. He passed away a few years ago, but CEO and founder. And he said, just because you can't measure the ROI of something doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. What's the ROI of hugging your mom? Right? So you know how to treat your people and how to get the best out of them. They just want to know that you're going to be there to support them, that you care about them beyond the job title, that you are going to create a safe space. And you do that by just simply showing that you care. And a lot of people I know, because my background was in HR, they're like, oh, well, then when life gets a little messy, how do we handle that? It's interesting because we always catastrophize the worst case scenario. So like a leader would say, well, I don't want to ask somebody after they've lost their husband how they're doing, because then they're going to unload everything on me. And I'm not, I can't handle that. I don't know how to handle that. Most people are not going to unload on you.
Right.
It's just, we start to create this story in our head, but every single person wants to know that they're cared for. So it is okay for you to even step into those hard spaces and say, very honestly, hey, I don't know what you need. I don't know how I can support you, but I just want you to know that I am here for you. That if there is anything that you need, I am happy to research the resources. I am happy to point you in the right direction or get you some help or whatever. If you need to take a day off and work from home, you have that flexibility. They just want to be treated as humans and not a job title.
Absolutely. So a question, I've been asking this a lot this year, is like that idea of giving feedback. So if you are the leader, you're creating this space. Sometimes there's growth opportunities, like you said. Sometimes people just screw up.
Yes.
How do you, any tips that you've picked up along the way working with different leaders, or that you use, I guess, in your life when you're giving feedback?
Absolutely. I actually have a whole section on this in my LinkedIn Learning course. It's called Leading with a Growth Mindset. And one of the videos does talk about feedback, because right now the issue that we bump up with when it comes to feedback is that we haven't really normalized feedback in the workplace. It usually comes during annual performance reviews.
Right.
So we wait a whole year and then we have a list of things that we need to talk about with this person. And that, how stressful is that? That's absolutely antiquated.
That probably wouldn't work in any other relationship.
Right. Come on. Exactly.
Just bottle it up.
Correct. If you just wait till the December and you tell your fiance all the things in the last year, come on. It's crazy. But with that is a change, right? We have to unlearn this old way of giving feedback and instead create a feedback culture where you give both positive and problematic feedback, right? So all of it should be in the vein of, I care about you and I want you to be better, but I could give you positive feedback and say, hey, you did really well on this. I know that was hard for you. I see how you were able to answer everybody's questions. You really showed up. Like, that is positive feedback. And that absolutely helps somebody grow. The same way that problematic feedback can help someone grow. Hey, I noticed that you didn't get this in on time the last 3 months. I just want to find out, is everything okay with you? Is there something that you're missing that is not helping you to get this report in on time? Whatever it looks like. But the key in both of those, positive and problematic, is you have to be specific. You can't say something general like, oh, I kind of feel like you were not responsive. What? No, because now what you're butting up against is an opinion, and then somebody else is going to have a different opinion. But if you say something specific, like, for the last 3 months, your reports have been coming in about 5 days late, and we need them to be in on the 30th because that's what helps us to get it. Now we have very specific evidence and details that we can work with, that we can measure that they have grown. Right? And because it is specific, it's more objective than it is emotional. And so but again, whether you're giving positive or problematic, the key is to normalize feedback. My son and I do this all the time. Every time that my son gets a report card from school, we also have a mommy report card. And he tells me how I'm doing. And it's actually great because sometimes I don't notice things in myself, right? As we all do. And so if he's the closest person to me, of course I want to hear how our interactions are, how we can work better as a team, what I'm doing well or what I could be doing better. But because we've normalized feedback, I'm not offended. I don't get defensive when it comes to me. Instead, I have a different open mind to say, okay, if I'm hearing this, what can I take from this that is going to help me show up better? And in those moments when you're delivering at work, it's very important that, again, it's specific, but that both parties stay open. And if you notice that there is any bit of emotion that's going to derail the conversation, it's also okay to put a pin in it and say, I know that this could be hard to hear. You know, my intention is not to upset you. I care about your growth. I care about your success. If you need a little bit of time to digest, I'm happy to give that to you, but I would like for us to circle back so that we can create a shared action plan, because my goal is to give you everything that you need to succeed. Again, if you treat these people with care and compassion and like the humans that we are, you are going to get the best out of your folks.
I love it. So you mentioned the leader recently from I think the telecom industry. When you've been working with folks, that idea of what makes a great leader, I think, has changed over the years from maybe the business books we all read 20 years ago, right? When you're seeing that leader, whether it's a CEO of an organization or just somebody who's leading a team, what today do you feel makes someone a great leader?
Yeah, again, I think this came on the other side of the pandemic because we are so used to, it's just ingrained in us to be very business operated at work. Rightfully so, right? We got business to do. We got work to take care of. So yes, we do need to be able to wear those hats. But now where we are, especially as technology continues to advance, and there are going to be, different responsibilities under these various roles, all of our roles that will be more automated. What's going to help people to continue to thrive, and I think more term of like long-term sustainable success, isn't just your business operation. It's more so of your human operation. And what I mean by that is you can help somebody, by giving them a book on some skills that they need to work on, right? Or you can set them up for a leadership development course, or that's fine, right? But at the end of the day, nobody is really teaching how do you connect with one another in a way that cultivates trust, in a way that helps us to grow together through our differences, because everybody is different, right? We talked about the fingerprint of the brain and the soul and all that. Everybody is so different. And it's these softer skills that they used to be nice to haves, but now they're absolutely necessary because top talent will not work for a subpar culture. So if you're talking about attracting top talent, if you're talking about wanting to be the best of the best in your industry, the people who are looking for a place to thrive, they're not looking for someone who's just going to tell them how to do their job. They know how to do their job. They're looking for people who are going to give them the tools to flourish. And that comes in a human to human, heart to heart relationship, not in a business transactional relationship. So the way that I tell leaders is, listen, we're in a time right now where there's a lot of hard work to do. There's a lot of good work to do, and people are willing to do it. They just want to do it in a human way. That's actually, it's not even the future of leadership. That is the now of leadership.
It's the now. Yep. I agree with you. Yeah, one more question on leadership. And I want to be respectful of your time and get to have a little fun with some
As you can tell, I love talking about this too, Randy. Give it to me.
And I'm enjoying this thoroughly. So this is amazing. I'm just sitting here nodding my head and smiling. So, since people can't see that on a podcast, but
I know I was saying, I know the listeners are feeling this energy because we're giving it.
Right. Absolutely. And this kind of goes to your growth mindset, and I look forward to checking out your LinkedIn learning class also. I didn't see that. Often, we see this in credit unions a lot, but I know that we're not alone. Like as the organization grows, that you almost become slower to change, slower to innovate, slower to growth, because it's like, whether it's that's the way it's always been done, or it's, all those kind of cliches out there. It's tougher to turn a big ship or whatever, So how do you keep that growth mindset today as the organization, as your team has grown and does have a history of success, but just doing the same thing over and over isn't going to keep you successful in my view.
Yeah, that's true. So, times are changing, right? And everything is changing. So you have to be adaptable. The first thing is everything starts from the top. We know this, right? And it cascades down. What happens is if you have that middle line manager, director, what have you, and they're starting to implement these different changes, they can try their best. But if it really is not supported at the top of the leadership chain, if you will, and this is different, I know, for every organization. Not every organization is a, hierarchy, but there is some level of who do we bubble up to, and also where is this coming down from? So we have to be very conscious of that. So what I tell people, because that is something that comes up a lot, is like, well, how do we change the mindset of upper management? I subscribe to what you're saying, Karen, but like, how can I make sure? And I found this actually, it was great feedback from one of the managers that I worked with. And it was after I read this book. And so I share this quote a lot because it resonated with me so deeply. I have a big heart to serve many. But sometimes this big heart of mine, that wants to initiate so many changes and really create these big ripple effects. Sometimes it feels like, well, how can little old me make a change in this big world? So I relate to those managers who are like, how can little old me change this big old organization and the way that we've done things for 50, 60 years? And to that, I say, you don't have to save the whole world. You just have to serve your corner of the world well. And when I read that in a book, it changed everything for how I show up, because I would get weary. I would feel like what I'm doing isn't enough and that it wasn't going to change everything. But instead, I just readjusted my focus to say, you know what? I may not be able to change the whole world. And for you, dear listener, you may not be able to change your entire organization, but you can make an impact on all the lives that you touch. And guess what? That works across any hierarchy. You will change and influence the lives of those above you, of those next to you, of those who may report to you, anybody who you cross paths with. The way that you show up, as we mentioned earlier, Randy, people will notice a difference in you. And so I say, don't worry about changing the entire organization, right? That will come, or it won't, and you will find a new place to serve.
Then you'll be doing that reset.
Right. We'll be doing the reset. But take that pressure off yourself to change the way that things have been done, and instead change what's happening inside of you and let your change be the change agent that creates a ripple effect in the lives of those around you. When you do that, you will see everything in your life shift. I mean, it is just like this internal peace that just, it really does. It changes everything that your life touches.
I love that. All right. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with some rapid fire questions. The questions are rapid, but your answers don't have to be. So, I love this question. That's why I ask it. But when was the last time, Karen, you were amazed either personally or professionally?
Oh, actually, I was just amazed last week when I went to see the Golden Gate Bridge in person, and I was so close to it, and I was looking at all of the architectural design in it. And I'm just amazed that something so big, so detailed has seen the world change like over and over. Like, to be the Golden Gate Bridge and see how the world around it has changed. I did stand there for a moment. I was like, this is pretty amazing.
Pretty amazing. Literally earthquakes even. So.
Right. Yes.
So something, and you talked about relationships and like the way that we manage relationships, even towards how maybe we manage work relationships. But one of the things that I've noticed is, from interviewing and becoming friends with a lot of the CEOs who've been on this show and other leaders, is sometimes that drive to succeed can, let's just say, cause havoc with those interpersonal relationships. Maybe you get a bad score on the mommy report card, right? Anything lived and learned that you could offer the leaders out there on how to create that balance to make sure that we're balancing the work relationship in our professional careers, but also making sure that we're not neglecting the home and the interpersonal relationships as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think the problem is that we think we can do everything all the time, but the reality is we play many roles. And so in every single moment, you're just leading with a different role. And there was this moment in 2019, actually, where my son had just had tongue tie surgery and a stitch fell out. He was bleeding. It was like crazy, but it was also the time where I was working on like an 18 spread email marketing campaign because Black Friday was coming up. So on this Wednesday before Black Friday, I'm in the emergency room with my son with one hand holding the gauze in his mouth as he's bleeding and the other hand trying to type out some email that needed to go on the Black Friday. And I stopped and I said, this is absolutely ridiculous. I don't don't need to get this email done. I will do Cyber Monday if I need to, but in this moment, I need to be fully present for my son. And he wasn't complaining. He wasn't, crying. He wasn't upset. He is such a trooper, but it was the internal battle that really made me feel like, Karen, you should not have one foot here and the other foot there. It's okay for you to be fully present. And I closed my computer and I said, never again will I feel torn between work and my son. I will always put him first if there is a moment of crisis where he needs me, number one. And number two, I will always give myself permission to be one thing at one time, because sometimes that's needed. Sometimes you can do it all, but there are times where you cannot, and you need to give yourself permission to just be fully present in the moment that needs your attention.
Agreed. So I dig the idea of having kind of like a mission, not a job. Do you have a personal mission statement, or what drives you? Or your North Star? How about that?
My North Star. Well, that is two different answers, because my North Star is my son. I knew that I wanted to create a life where I could always be there for him first, that I could be the best single parent. I call it a super parent that I could be. And so that's why I started to, even pursue entrepreneurship. But really what my mission is, because I think that changes through the work that I'm doing. If I'm on stage, it's different than working with somebody one-on-one, for example. But my mission is always the same, is to help you find joy and build strength. Because I think if you can do that, and if I can help you do that, then regardless of what life throws at you, you will be able to weather that storm.
I love that. What's the greatest album of all time? That one you can still listen to front to back.
Oh my gosh. I listen to music nonstop. So, and I have different playlists on all the time. Oh, you know what? This is going to make people laugh. The two albums that I just found that I listened to front to back, one was Dixie Chicks.
Okay.
And it was from like 1996. I forget what it was called. I think it was maybe Fly. And then the other one was Linkin Park and Jay-Z mashup.
Awesome.
I found both of those in the same week, and I listened to them both front to back. And I was like, I'm so happy.
That's fantastic. Trying to think if I remember the Linkin Park and Jay. I'm a big Jay-Z fan. So, I mean, did that slip my mind? No. Okay. Perfect spot. I can tell everybody about your book. First of all, we will link to it in the show notes and everything. This goes along with the question, though. After you tell us about your book, which we will all hopefully read, what's that book that you've, besides your own, gifted to others, or you just think everybody should read?
I love that question, because I do gift books often. So my book, Stop and Shift, is all about the mental framework that helped me to find my way out of negative thought cycles that were really detrimental to my mental health and also just to life in general. But I didn't know that there was a way out. So once I started to utilize this framework, I was like, oh man, this is something other people should hear about. I should start writing about it. So finally, I started actually writing it in 2018. And then I put it on the digital shelf and it collected dust. And then the pandemic hit. And as everything started to become more in demand, I'm very grateful that the book was ready and the manuscript was ready. Some updates in there, but now it is available. And it's all about the mental exercise to help you just release negative thought cycles and find a positive or productive way forward. So that's Stop and Shift. But the book that I gift everybody most often is actually The Alchemist.
I just want to say something. You are the guest right before you on the show. The previous episode, Ty Muse, the CEO of Visions Credit Union, that was his book also. And that's my fiance's favorite book. It was the first book she gifted me. So The Alchemist is just on a roll here.
Yes, it's so good. Oh my goodness. And I really love books that, another one that's very similar to The Alchemist is Life's Golden Ticket by Brendon Burchard. And what those books have in common is it's a fictional book that is loaded with real life advice. You think that you're reading this person's journey, and then all of a sudden you're like, I'm this person. Like, I need that. Yes.
How did they know I needed that right now?
Exactly. My therapist once said, whatever is personal is universal. And I do believe that's true. It is the human experience.
I love that. When you hear the word success, who is that first person that comes to mind and why?
That's a good question. Kobe Bryant.
Oh, tell me more.
And yeah, the reason that Kobe comes to mind is because of his definition of the Mamba mentality, which success is not what everybody else expects of you or the expectations that other people put on your life.
Absolutely.
the Mamba mentality and Kobe's philosophy is really about being the best version of yourself. And how do you become the best? And I feel like when you do that, when you get to know yourself, love yourself, and trust yourself, that is success.
I love it. Last question. Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share or asks of our listeners today?
We all go through so many different trials. I mean, if somebody were to run your life back, you'd probably be like, man, I would not have asked for, expected any of that, right? But I just want everyone to feel so encouraged, because when I started to understand how beautifully complex the human mind is, I feel more in control of how I live my life, how I appreciate life, and how I am intentionally crafting my life. And so I just encourage you, regardless of what you feel like you've been up against or what you've had to work through or anything weighing you down, once you start to tap into the true potential of the human mind, you will find freedom.
I love it. What a perfect way to wrap this up. And there you go, folks. That is it. Thank you so much, Karen, for being on the show. I greatly appreciate you spending the time with me, and we can't wait to have you on Mini-Con. And I'm excited to read your book. I know we'll be giving away copies of it too, and during Mini-Con. So thank you again for all of that. We will link to everything we talked about today in the show notes. A few things before we go: make sure to check out Elan credit cards in the show notes as well. Their digital technology, industry leading rewards products, and commitment to credit unions have made them a great partner for our show and for all of you. And I greatly appreciate their support, letting me have this much fun doing what I do. A few more things: subscribe to the CUInsight Experience on your favorite podcast player. We're on them all. And if you're looking for a book mentioned, like Karen's or The Alchemist, just a quick Google of the CUInsight Experience podcast book list, and your next read will be on its way from Amazon. Certainly, last but not least, thank all of you for listening. Y'all rock. Look forward to seeing you all again out on the road again soon. Be well, friends, and talk to you soon.